Evan Horn, and welcome to This Week in the Triangle. I'm an independent journalist here in North Carolina, and on this weekly broadcast, I'm stumbling over my words here. On this weekly broadcast, we get into some local stories from the past week here in the Greater Triangle area of North Carolina. Give you some thoughts, kind of let you know a little bit about what is going on in the various communities in the area. And this edition happens to be a little bit of a transportation edition. We have trains, cars, bus drivers at least, and of course crime, because there's always crime going on. And so let's get into it with our first story here about trains in Johnson County, because there has been another fatality, another person who has been run over by the train. In this case, the Clayton police say that he tried to drive around the crossing arms coming down. The lights were flashing, the arms were down, but he drove around them, got hit by a train, car went flying 300 feet, and he was unfortunately deceased. However, what is especially newsworthy is that this is the fourth train fatality in Johnson County this year, and the third in Clayton alone. So on August 5th, less than a mile away from this accident, a student from UNC Wilmington who had some sort of internship in Clayton, she was crossing the train tracks, walking back to her car, and was hit by an Amtrak train and unfortunately killed. Earlier on June 20th, another pedestrian was struck by an Amtrak train, once again in downtown Clayton. And on June 14th, a pedestrian was killed crossing a train track in Smithfield in the middle of the night. So what is going on here? Is this merely a coincidence? Is this some sort of pattern? Is this, maybe maybe there's stuff on both sides of the train tracks that people like to get to? Maybe they're not using the appropriate crossing measures. So I did look up, I'm kind of a data guy. I did look up the federal train accident reports, train fatality reports, to see, hey, is this a common thing? Is this happening more often in Johnson County, or is this just sort of a random pattern, a random cluster that happens to be in the same county, in the same town? So over the past 10 years, between 2015 and 2024, there have been 12 fatalities in Johnson County, counted as railroad fatalities by the Federal Rail Administration. And you can look all this data up on their website. But so 11 out of those 12 are listed as trespassers, which basically means they weren't a passenger, they weren't an employee, they weren't someone that's supposed to be on the tracks. So, whether that's people crossing the tracks where they're not supposed to be, whether that is vehicles driving across when they're not supposed to, because trains have the right of way. You're not supposed to cross the tracks when the train is coming, because the train cannot stop. So if you are in a vehicle, if you are a pedestrian, well, the train is not going to stop for you. So we have, these lists of 12 incidents over the past, 10 years in Johnson County. People fatally injured. Some of them are pedestrians, while others are listed as highway collisions. Those are, listed separately. And so how does that compare? Well, in neighboring Wake County, over the same 10-year period of time, there were 14 railroad fatalities. Now, Wake County has about 5 times the population, and it also has more railroads. So on a per capita basis, that would mean a lot more people are getting hit by trains in Johnson County for whatever reason. I do not know the reason, but perhaps people should look into it. So once again, most of the fatalities in Wake County are listed as trespassers. So fewer highway rail collision impacts, more struck by on-track equipment is how it is reported in these statistics. Actually, the same number. Well, yeah. So it's the majority are struck by on-track equipment, and then a few of them are highway rail collision impact as well. So it does seem like they're, looking at a longer period of time, it does seem like there are more, people getting hit by trains in Johnson County. I don't know why this is the case, but there is the data for you. And our next story here is from the highways, and this is, perhaps sort of the other end of the transportation safety spectrum, which is a Wake County legislator, a Democrat, was caught driving while looking at her phone. This was a video shared by a citizen. They said they saw a Tesla going 10 miles under the speed limit on Highway 55, and they were surprised to see it was a legislator with the official General Assembly plates. When they looked through the window, they saw that she was holding her hands on the steering wheel with her phone in, horizontal mode, landscape mode, apparently looking at something on her phone while she was driving. And this is Representative Guangya Ya Liu. She goes by Ya. She's a Democrat and her district is currently in the southwestern corner of Wake County. And we have actually reported on her before. She was previously disciplined by the state bar for a pattern of misconduct involving trust accounts. This was actually reported on by no other news outlets until a Republican brought it to me and said, hey, no one has reported on this. So I reported on that at the time. That was back in September. Now, Liu does represent a heavily Democrat district, so there is not really any opportunity for a Republican to successfully challenge her, even though she is driving dangerously on the roads. And next up, we have a story from down in Harnett County, and this is our article of the week. So I did a little investigation based off of a press release from the Harnett Sheriff about smoke shops that they raided, tobacco or vape shops. They raided 9 of them. They seized THC products. And this was based on, they did controlled buys, sent some products off to the laboratory, and the lab confirmed that the level of THC in these products was above the legal limit. So the Harnett Sheriff says that this investigation was based on reports they had of these shops selling THC products to children. They said they've had overdoses. I don't think an overdose of THC is quite the same as perhaps other harder drugs. But they've had medical emergencies in the Harnett County schools with minors, and so they did this investigation, testing these products for their THC levels. They ended up seizing 64 pounds of THC and $49,000 in cash. But what I found particularly interesting was that in the press release, it listed the premises that they raided, and it listed the owners. And each one of these owners has a Middle Eastern or foreign name. And I thought that was a little interesting. There does appear to be a correlation here. I looked up, what one of these last names. 3 of these owners have the same last name, Salah. Apparently, this is a pretty common Arabic name. So I looked it up in the North Carolina Secretary of State listings, and I looked at, the first 20 listings for people with a last name of Salah. And 8 of those results, 8 of those listings in the Secretary of State business lookup was for tobacco or vape shops, and another 3 were gas stations or convenience stores. So apparently there is a pretty strong correlation, though, between Middle Easterners setting up businesses and setting up tobacco or vape shops. And I don't particularly know why that is. Perhaps it's a cultural thing. Perhaps it's just a market opportunity they're seizing. Or perhaps they don't have the same scruples that Americans might have in terms of selling these vice products. Whether they're legal or whether they are not legal, you are selling products that people can get addicted to, that are generally sort of there is some cultural awareness that they can be dangerous, that they can cause negative effects for society. So perhaps that is the reason why they are dominated by foreigners, is that Americans don't really want to get involved in these businesses. I don't know. Perhaps that is the reason. Perhaps that is not. But what I can say is that every single name on this list, every single owner of these 9 institutions they rated, does appear to have a Middle Eastern name. And I'm no expert. I don't know exactly what country of origin all these names are. Asking the AI overlords, it suggested Yemen as a possible origin for some of these names. But I looked them up. I couldn't really find any sources to confirm that. But when you have names like Muhammad, Ahmed, you know, they're pretty obviously Middle Eastern names. And yeah, there is sort of a stereotype there, and apparently the stereotype is completely true, like many stereotypes are. And the next story we have here is from over in Durham, and this is a crazy story and also very sad. So the Durham police have arrested 2 out of 3 shooters who they ambushed a group of individuals who came for a pre-scheduled fight. So these 2 women, they arranged over Instagram to meet at Whippoorwill Park. It was just past midnight on May 30th. So, two vehicles pull up from, individuals associated with the woman who had been challenged to this fight. And when they got there, 3 people come out of the woods, start shooting at them. The Durham police says that video shows one of these shooters had an automatic rifle. Now, one of the individuals in the vehicles did shoot back, but ultimately, this ambush did injure 2 women and killed a man. So this was a fatal ambush, and there have been 2 arrests of Eddie Stephen Flores Reyes, 24 years old, and Gracie Elizabeth Faye Landa, 18. And so basically, one of the targets of this ambush, she told the police that Landa, this 18-year-old woman, had reached out to her on Instagram to come to that park to fight that night. So this is from search warrants for basically they're able to track that Instagram account back to an email address, back to a phone number, and a residence over in Burlington, and then they're able to get the cell phone data to show that these 2 individuals who were arrested had been at that residence and then had gone to the park that night. And so they raided the house, seized guns, whatnot. And so the man here apparently had also tried to fight one of the other targets who had showed up with this woman who had been challenged to the fight. And so the man here who has been arrested, he also apparently told them that he was affiliated with a gang, TCS. That's also in the Instagram bio that of the account that apparently belongs to him, which the Durham police says is the Tarascos gang. And I don't really know much about any of that stuff, whether or not that is legitimate, what sort of criminal organization that might be. But the story takes an even darker turn. If you can, if a story about murder can get even darker. But so Gracie Elizabeth Faye Landa was previously reported as a missing teen back in 2023. When she was 16, she was reported missing from her Tampa home. And apparently, she was still missing a year later when authorities put out an update saying, "We believe she's in Durham." In hindsight, it seems like that whatever information they received was correct. She was in Durham or the Durham area. That is where this ambush took place. So this woman who had been missing, one of the things, which apparently may have been the root of these fights, is that the man had previously, been in communication with the sister of one of the women who is the targets of this ambush. And what one of these targets told police is that Landa was the man's baby mama. So she's 18. She just turned 18 in February, a couple months before this ambush. So if we put the pieces together, this man who is I guess 6 years older than her, if we're doing the math. Yeah, so he's 24, she's 18. This man was 6 years older than her apparently impregnated her when she was a minor, when she was missing from her family. So, kind of sounds like some sort of grooming situation. So now the police do know where she is, but unfortunately, she appears to have, um, arranged and plotted and committed a murder, which is definitely not how you want any missing child case to turn out. So very crazy. Once again, as whenever we're talking about crime, this is innocent until proven guilty. Um, but yeah, crazy story. Very, very sad situation. If you were putting the pieces together from what we know or what has been alleged in court documents. And our next story here is perhaps a little more positive, though it does involve PFAS or forever chemicals. PFAS is this category of chemicals that, they're called forever chemicals because they stick around if they're in your drinking water. If you are consuming them, they can be bad for you. So the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, has set limits. They're saying your water should not have more than 4 parts per trillion. Um, that is a very small amount, but sometimes even very small amounts of chemicals can be very hazardous. But in this case, we have an article from WRAL about 3 different water systems in the Triangle. We have the City of Durham Water Management, the Cary Apex Water Treatment Facility, and the Orange Water Sewer Authority. So apparently these were flagged by the EPA as potentially having issues with these PFAS chemicals. And so Durham did a public meeting recently talking about their current efforts to measure and mitigate these. So they have measured levels that are slightly above this 4 parts per trillion. Both in the water coming into the city's 2 water treatment plants from Lake Michie and the Little River Reservoir, and also still having levels just above that limit coming out of those water treatment plants. So they're currently working on more mitigation measures. So the Cary Apex Water Treatment Facility, which receives water from Jordan Lake, they also measure and test their PFAS levels. They have some mitigation efforts in place, and they say that they have been able to bring those levels under the EPA's standard. And so finally, in Orange County, they're treating water from the Cane Creek Reservoir. They are currently constructing a treatment facility, but they are already doing some treatment. And they actually recommend against eating fish caught in the Cane Creek Reservoir because they have measured high levels of these forever chemicals in the fish being caught at the Cane Creek Reservoir. So, if you get city water, you might want to look up the statistics, the data, the measurements for whatever your specific water system you're getting it from. If you have a well, I don't know if this is as much of an issue with wells, but might not hurt to get your water tested if this is something that you are concerned about. And our next story here, also involving vehicles. Remember, this is the transportation edition, and this is involving vehicles being broken into. Now, we have reported on a couple stories recently involving people who have been responsible for multiple break-ins across the state or across multiple states, but apparently, breaking and entering vehicles is one of these crimes that is mostly committed by people who do it a lot. It's not sort of a casual thing. It doesn't seem to be nearly as much of a crime of opportunity because the Raleigh police have arrested a 17-year-old. They have linked to at least dozens and possibly over 100 cars being broken into. And so if your car has been broken into, it was probably broken into by someone who has broken into a lot of cars. And this really is the case where, vigorous policing can reduce crime. Now, obviously, the police can't necessarily eliminate criminal tendencies. Some communities commit crime at a lot higher rates than others. The police can't necessarily change that, but what they can do is put criminals in jail, put criminals in prison, because that is one of the primary ways in which the law enforcement, the criminal justice system reduces crime, is that while criminals are in prison, while they are incarcerated, they do not have the opportunity to commit crimes against the general public. And so every criminal that is in prison is not, he's not out there breaking into more cars while he is in prison. And so this is one of the obvious cases where vigorous investigation, vigorous enforcement, vigorous prosecution can reduce crime, because if these whether they're juveniles or they're adults, if they're, it's a relatively small number of individuals committing almost all of this type of crime. And so identifying those individuals, putting them away, can can make there be a lot less crime, a lot less damage to the citizens of Wake County and these surrounding areas, citizens who for no reason are having their cars broken into and stuff stolen. So we had another incident from the same week in which Cary police are responding to 5 cars which had been broken into on Tuesday, and they encountered 2 stolen Kias which match the description of the robbers. So they attempt to pull over these Kias. The drivers flee. They end up each crashing separately. And so the police arrested 2 juveniles at one crash site, a third juvenile at the third crash site, all three juveniles under the age of 17. And I think the data bears out that if you are already engaged in a pattern of extreme criminal activity like stealing cars and breaking into cars, you're not on a good trajectory. You're probably going to be causing a lot of damage to society without your life, and it would probably be better for the rest of us if you were permanently locked up, or perhaps some other criminal justice solution. And I pulled a little data here from the North Carolina Sentencing and Policy Advisory Commission. They have some interesting reports on data that is actually from the North Carolina criminal justice system. So for juveniles who were criminal juveniles who were committed, sent to I guess they call them youth development centers, but I believe this is basically, juvenile detention, basically prison for juveniles. So out of juveniles who had been committed, 62% of them had a recidivism event within 2 years. And so this recidivism event could be arrest, could be conviction, but basically they're back in trouble with the law. 62%, nearly 2/3. And so this is, I think a lot of people have this especially on the left, they have this mythological view of crime in which it's random. There's really nothing you can do about it. It just happens. And the only way you can reduce crime is through communism, by redistributing wealth. And that basically if people were poor, they wouldn't commit crime. But we know this is not the case. We know some people commit crime. And it's relatively few people who commit crime over and over again. And that is most crime. And we can stop that crime by punishing those people vigorously, by identifying them, by prosecuting them, by, under the current system, the primary punishment for serious crimes is locking them away. So if that's what we're going to go with, these people need to be locked up. And unfortunately, a lot of them do start as children. And we would like to give them grace because they are children. But the fact is, the people who are committing crimes as children are probably going to be committing crimes as adults. That is the same case with the so-called school to prison pipeline. The children who are misbehaving in school, the children who are fighting in school, the children who are committing crimes in school are the children who are going to end up in prison when they're adults, because that is their pattern of behavior. That is how they're being raised. And that ends up being how they live out their lives, causing great, huge, massive amounts of damage and harm to peaceable citizens. And yeah, there is something we can do about it, which is vigorously prosecute crime. And our next story here also happens to be crime related. This is from UNC. This is the 2-year anniversary of the on campus shooting of a UNC professor, Ziji Yan. I'm sure I'm butchering that, but it's a Chinese name, who was killed by a fellow Chinese man, a graduate student, Talia Qi. So Key was charged with the murder, but he has been ruled unfit for trial due to untreated schizophrenia after being evaluated, and he has been basically permanently involuntarily committed to a mental hospital. I believe there's one mental hospital in North Carolina where they keep all of the people who are too crazy to stand trial. And so earlier this year, it was reported that UNC agreed to a $750,000 settlement with the professor's family. And this week, for the 2-year anniversary, they unveiled a memorial bench and a plaque, in memory of this murdered professor. At the time, there was a lockdown. People thought it might have been a mass shooting, but apparently it was just a murder, a very sad incident. And our final story for the week is once again from Durham, but this is about the people who believe that there should be no restrictions on immigration. There should be no immigration law enforcement, and their cause celebre of this week was a Duke bus driver. This man is a Honduran. He has reportedly been in the country under temporary protected status since 1998. So basically in 1998, there was a Hurricane Mitch. It hit Honduras. And so the United States government graciously said, we will grant you temporary protected status. So people from Honduras can come here, avoid other, immigration restrictions. And that temporary protected status, despite temporary being in the name, despite temporary being in the law under which it is issued, that status, based on the hurricane, was still in effect until 2025. So 27 years of the immigration laws being thrown out the window because of a hurricane 27 years ago until this year, when the Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, announced that, quote, the government of Honduras has taken all of the necessary steps to overcome the impacts of Hurricane Mitch. Once again, a hurricane in 1998. And that, quote, Honduran citizens can safely return home, and DHS is here to help facilitate their voluntary return. This Honduran bus driver, who never got any other legal status other than this intended temporary measure, he is going to be sent back to Honduras. And so Siembra NC, which is this organization which opposes the enforcement of immigration law, they held a press conference and whatnot. Tried to rally some support. But yeah, I think what this really illustrates is that on the topic of immigration, if you give an inch, they will take a mile. If you pass a law saying that the government can designate these temporary statuses, to help some victims of some natural disaster, they stretch that out to basically be unfettered mass migration from third world countries. There is absolutely no reason that there should be 27 years of status of allowing people to come to America because of one hurricane. Now, if I lived in Honduras, I would rather live in the United States as well. But as the United States, the government has the responsibility to protect our borders, to protect our nation, and it is frustrating to see the generosity of the American people being subverted by bureaucrats who hate America and want there to be fewer Americans. That's my 2 cents, anyways. So if you've tuned in, if you appreciate this broadcast, make sure to check us out over at triangletrumpet.news. That's where we publish articles, or we publish these weekly stories as a newsletter that goes out every Saturday with stories from the week. And so thanks for tuning in.